Once upon a time, there was a man sitting quietly by a pool of water. He was a very sick man. He doubted that he had very long to live. And while he sat there staring into the pool, something stirred the water. It was almost like a hand had reached in and swished the water back and forth. He was puzzled by it. Nobody else was there. Wondering, he put out his own hand and swished the water back and forth. And as he did so, he realized he was beginning to feel better. And after a moment, he stood up and he realized that all his pain was gone. As the day went on, the realization grew that he was getting stronger by the minute, that obviously he was a well man. His friends were totally surprised, not to say shocked, at his recovery. And the natural course of events, they learned about the pool, they learned about the moving of the water, and for some time after that, all kinds of sick people went down to the pool and swished the water back and forth with their hands, but nothing happened. Nobody else was helped. That was no one until the same season next year when a very sick man was healed after a similar movement of the water. And another man who was lame, just after he had done so, stepped into the water and was not helped in the least. It happened again the third year. Unfortunately, over the years, only one person each year was healed. Never two. And always, generally speaking, not on any predictable day, but at some time during a season of the year, this happened. One man was healed, no one else was healed, and it could happen on any one of several days. It was a kind of a tough situation. One man could be looking the wrong way when the water was swished. Another man would be blind and didn't see it. Another man could be deaf and wouldn't have heard it. And yet, it happened. Many years passed, and then one day a man walked into the pool and looked around at all the sick people there. It was at this season of the year. And in this season of the year, when the water would be stirred and one person would be healed, it still said that an angel would stir the waters on those occasions. The name of the pool was Bethesda. The name of the man who walked in on this day was well known to all of us. It was Jesus of Nazareth. And he looked around at those that were there. The story is found in John the 5th chapter, and I'll read in verse 5. A certain man was there who had had an infirmity for 38 years. 38 years. A lot of you people have got quite a ways to go before you're even that old. And this poor fellow had been in this lame condition, this infirm condition he was in, for 38 years. And we have no idea how many of those 38 years he had come down to the pool every day at this time of year waiting for the moving of the water. Well, when Jesus saw him lying there and knew that he'd been a long time in that case, he said, "Would you like to be made whole?" And the impotent man said to him, "Sir, I have no man when the water is troubled to put me into the pool. But while I am coming, another one steps down ahead of me." And Jesus said to him, "Rise, stand up. Take your bed. Get up your bed. Walk." And immediately the man was made whole and took up his bed and walked. And the same day was the Sabbath. Now, what lies behind this story is more interesting, I think, than the incident itself. The incident led to a major confrontation between Jesus and the Pharisees regarding the Sabbath, but that's not what caught my interest about this particular passage. What I thought was fascinating about the encounter was the resemblance to a lottery. Every year, only one person was healed, and the selection was made entirely at random. There was no question of merit. Nobody was better than anybody else. Nobody was sicker than anybody else. No one had shorter periods of time to live. It just was a question of who was there at the time, saw it, and moved the quickest. A blind man, as I said earlier, might not see the moving of the water. A deaf man might not hear it. A lame man couldn't reach it fast enough. And you can just imagine how you would feel if you were standing there with polio, the results of polio, crippled for many long years of your life and facing the remainder of your life in that condition, standing next to a man who was suffering from an ailment that was obviously going to be fatal and who was going to be dead in a few weeks, leaving behind a wife and children. Would you have what it took to step in ahead of him? The drama that surrounds this event is incredible to contemplate. And even on this occasion, it had the same random quality to it. Maybe Jesus selected this one man for a reason, but if he he didn't say so. It had the same random quality, and more important, he came in, and just like the moving of the waters, he healed one man and left the rest of that gaggle of people there untouched. Now, the meaning of this is hard to fathom, and the implications of it sometimes are hard to deal with. And on the surface, it seems unfair. One man won the lottery, nobody else won it. But at the same time, it's a lot like life, isn't it? It's not fair that one man is sick and another person is not. It just happens. Now, I know that you could say, why does one man get cancer and why does another man not have cancer? Well, you could say it's because he's a smoker that he has cancer. The answer to that is, well, why then do some smokers get cancer and many do not? Because it's true. Some get cancer, some don't. Some get emphysema, some don't. And the ailments that people have as a result of their sins and their foibles fall upon them seemingly totally at random. Researchers tell us there's a genetic element to cancer, but that's not very well understood either. And even there appears to be a random, lottery-like quality to the roll of the dice in genetics. Our experience of life is really very much like what we read in the Bible story. Things happen to us in a way that is best described as random. It just happens to us. We are sick, another is not. We have cancer, another one doesn't. And we can go around looking for cause and effect, and we look for genetic predispositions and all this kind of stuff. But for all practical purposes, the selection is purely random. We don't like this very much. We would like to think our lives have meaning. If we are sick, we would like to know why we're sick, so we won't do such a stupid thing again and get ourselves there. And it's discomforting to think that all those people at the pool of Bethesda were sick for just such random accidents or incidents as the healing of the waters was. But it's the way it was. And when you think about this and you begin to realize the implications of it, other things begin to make sense. For example, in John 9 and verse 1, there's this interesting little case where Jesus was passing by a man who had been blind from his birth. And the disciples asked Jesus, Master, who did sin, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? The logical presumption was that sickness and disease are in this world because of sin. Therefore, if this man's blind, it must be his fault, it must be his parents' fault, it must be somebody's fault that this man is born blind. And that's what, as human beings, we would like to think. It's the kind of preference, I think, that we have, that we can find some meaning in some of these things instead of it being random. Jesus answered. He said, no, this man hasn't sinned, neither his parents, but that the works of God should be made manifest in him. And he healed him. And the healing was just as random as was the blindness. The conventional wisdom is that the man was born blind so Jesus could heal him. But that's not exactly what the passage says. Note, surely this man and his parents had sinned. Jesus is not saying that they had not sinned. He is merely saying that their sins had nothing to do with his blindness. They were not the cause of his blindness. The core argument, keep this in mind, that if sin were the cause of blindness, then everyone who committed the sin should be blind. It's an easy little exercise in logic, isn't it? But the fact is that not all sinners fare equally in this world, right? Some sinners get rich, some wax poor, some can see, some are blind, some have cancer, some are not, some die in their youth, some live to be 102. It's just one of those things that seems to happen in life. And you know, it is a lot like a lottery. And it's really hard for us to get our mind around this. It just doesn't seem right somehow that it should be that way. And the prevailing wisdom when Jesus came and talked to people was different. I mean, it was that way. It was, hey, this isn't fair. There must be a reason. There's a cause behind this thing that has happened here. In Luke 13, there's another little passage that echoes along those lines, and it's a really important statement that Jesus makes on this occasion. He says In Luke 13, verse 1, there were present at that season some that told him of the Galileans, whose blood Pilate had mingled with their sacrifices. In other words, they were there preparing to make sacrifices. They were Galileans. And Pilate's soldiers had come across them and had killed them, mingling their own blood with the blood of the animals they were sacrificing. And Jesus said to them, do you suppose that these Galileans were sinners above all the Galileans because they suffered such things? You know, I can hear the conventional wisdom at the time. Well, those people brought it on themselves. You know, they shouldn't have been there at that time. They should have been doing something else. They can go off the whole litany of who these people are, what they did, why they did it, why they didn't do it. And I can hear the gossip about why this happened to all these people. He says, do you suppose they were worse than anybody else because they suffered these things? No, said Jesus. Except you repent, you shall all likewise perish. Or those 18 upon whom the tower in Siloam fell. And people, I guess they were workers, I don't know what else, working around the base of the tower of Siloam, and the thing crumbled and fell on them and killed 18 people in one stroke. Do you suppose that they were sinners above everybody else in Jerusalem, and that's why they died there? So that all of us can stand off and say, well, I must have been living my life better than those guys because I wasn't under that. I could have been. Jesus said, no. Except you repent, you shall all likewise perish. What he is saying is, it isn't because these people were worse than anybody else that they died in this terrible accident. They were sinners, oh sure, but no more so than anybody else. They weren't the worst sinners. You know, get that out of your mind. These people were not merely sinners, they were profoundly unlucky. And they were no worse people than the ones the stones missed when they came down. Now, none of what I'm saying here is intended to be fatalistic, because I do know that what we do makes a difference. I do know the odds change if you smoke or if you don't smoke. I know the odds change if you drink too much and don't. I know the odds change if you drink and drive. I know all that type of thing. What we do makes a difference. What's important for you to understand is it doesn't make all the difference. There is a random quality to life. There is a lottery of life that's going to come upon people, regardless of whether they are good, whether they are bad, or whether they are indifferent. Stuff happens to them, and there's nothing you and I can do to stop that from happening. The preacher in Ecclesiastes said this, I returned and I saw under the sun that the race is not to the swift or the battle to the strong, neither yet bread to the wise, nor riches to men of understanding, nor yet favor to men of skill. But time and chance happens to everybody. That's Ecclesiastes 9:11 if you want to make a note, look it up later. It isn't always what you do that makes a difference. Time and chance happens to everybody. Now, I've told you all that to tell you this. All men are not created equal. I know that in what the founding fathers said, that all men are created equal and they're endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights and so forth. I have a rough idea of what they meant by that phrase. But there's really no way to say that phrase or qualify that phrase at the end of which it still doesn't come out wrong. All men are not created equal. Now, I think what they meant to say along some line was, because of what they said later, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. That all men have rights before the law, and those rights are equal before the law. But it's a long way from that to saying that all men are created equal. And any serious reader of the Bible ought to know that. I can remember as a kid, frankly, the first time I ever heard the Declaration of Independence said, and I heard that all men are created equal, I said to myself, no, they're not. That I realized immediately, as everybody intuitively would try to say, we know that some of us are taller than others. We know some of us are stronger than others. We know some of us run faster than others. And even then, though, I didn't understand the depth to which that statement was not correct, literally speaking. In Matthew 25, one of the most familiar of all Jesus' parables is the real classic illustration of what we're talking about here. And it's important for us as Christian people to understand what Jesus is saying here for a variety of reasons. And it is important for us to understand that we are not all created equal. He said, the kingdom of heaven is like a man traveling into a far country who called his own servants and delivered them his goods. And to one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, to another 1, to every man according to his several ability, and straightway took his journey. We learn immediately from this that men differ in ability. And in this case, they differ in ability by a ratio of 5 to 1. So you have an enormous difference in the quality of these men in terms of what they are able to do and accomplish. One's given 5, one's given 2, another 1. Then he that had received the 5 talents went and traded with the same and made 5 other talents. Likewise, he that had received 2, he gained other 2. And he that had received 1 went and digged in the earth and hid his Lord's money. After a long time, the Lord of those servants came and reckoned with them. And he that had received 5 talents came and he brought 5 others, saying, Look, Lord, you delivered to me 5 talents. I doubled your money. Look, I have 5 talents more. His Lord said, Well done, you good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a few things. I will make you ruler over many things. Enter into the joy of your Lord. Now, this little item here, you've been faithful over a few things, I'm going to make you ruler over many things, is profound. Because it reveals to us what is going on with this seeming inequality that's here. That people have differences in abilities to start with, and then they are given, in addition to their abilities, things to work with commensurate with their abilities. Why? Why is this being done this way? Well, we'll come back to this in a short order, but this little verse right here tells us why. He said he received 2 talents. He that had received 2 talents came and said, Lord, you delivered me 2 talents. I've gained 2 more besides these. The Lord said, Well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful over a few things. I will make you ruler over many things. Enter into the joy of your Lord. Then the non-achiever came by. He had received 1 talent and came and said, Lord, I knew you that you are a hard man, reaping where you had not sown, gathering where you had not strawed. And I was afraid and went and hid your talent in the earth, and there you have what is yours. Now, we know right off the start that this is a fellow of considerably less native ability than the first guy. He came into this world with less to work with. We all know this. Some time back, a gentleman wrote a book called The Bell Curve, in which he concluded that IQ is destiny. And he laid out the story of how human beings are all distributed along a bell curve in IQ from the lowest to the highest and so forth. And he talked in some measure about the reasons why these things happen to people and why they come out that way. But the truth is that, you can maybe modify it to some extent by nurture. But nature has a great deal to do with it. It is a roll of the dice as to whether some children are going to be advanced and some children are not. And nobody can often tell which way that's going to fall. Now, so this guy, it's not his fault that he didn't have as much ability as the first guy. This seems to be inherent in the parable. It is not his fault that he was lacking in ability. He was not given a task that was above his capabilities. He wasn't burdened down with the 5 talents. He was only burdened down with the 1 talent. He had to do something. So since he was not overburdened, and since he really didn't have a lot of ability in the first place, we should cut this fellow some slack, right? We should give him a break. Maybe if he's a student in school, we should just go ahead and pass him on up to the next grade anyway. In any case, we shouldn't do anything to damage this poor guy's self-esteem. Right? Wouldn't that be the approach that would generally be approved now in the 21st century where we find ourselves? Well, what happened to the man? Well, his Lord answered and said, You wicked and slothful servant. You knew what you were up against. You knew I'm a hard man. You knew I reap where I don't sow. You knew I gather where I don't straw. You ought to have put my money to the exchangers, and at my coming I could have received my own with usury, with just the interest, so that I would have just had the time value of money coming back to me. But no. You had to play it safe. Then he said, Take the talent from him, give it to him that has 10 talents, for to everyone that has shall be given, and he shall have abundance. From him that has not shall be taken away even what he's got. And cast the unprofitable servant into outer darkness. There shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Just seems unfair, doesn't it? But remember, Jesus started off this parable by saying, the kingdom of heaven is like this. And that ought to give you a chill, make your blood run just a little bit cold. That the kingdom of heaven is like this. The kingdom of heaven has accountability somewhere waiting in the wings for all of us. And that's disturbing. Very disturbing. Just as disturbing as realizing the accidents of life. Now, there is a very well-intentioned philosophy abroad that thinks that we should work in this life that we live here and this culture for equal outcomes. They consider that the absence of equal outcomes means that equal opportunity has been denied, and that therefore we should use coercive methods to create equal outcomes. The presumption in this is that by using the coercive methods and creating the equal outcomes, that now we have actually created equal opportunity. That if we have unequal outcomes, then obviously we have done something wrong. Somebody's done something wrong. Somebody has been abused. Somebody has been neglected. Somebody hasn't been taken care of. We've got to do something about it. And in the end, what that really means back is that all students must pass, even if we penalize and hold back the best and the brightest. Now, there's going to be a real battle fought over the President's education initiatives. I am surprised there hasn't been more screaming and moaning about it yet. But I remember not that long ago, there was an initiative came through and passed in Texas that was going to require all teachers to pass a reading test. Remember? Somebody had the really novel idea that teachers ought to be able to read. I mean, if you didn't live in Texas, you probably missed this, that there was an incredible outcry and moaning and groaning from the teaching community about requiring teachers to take a reading test. I guess they didn't think teachers should have to be able to read. Unless you think it was an exercise in futility, there were quite a few teachers that did not pass the basic, fundamental reading test in the state of Texas. Now, there will be, before we get down to the nuts and bolts of Bush's plan, there will be an outcry over this. There's going to be a battle over it. And I want to make a prediction. Even when they have found out that all students were not created equal, even when they have corrected all the schools, improved the programs, educated the teachers, put computers in all the classrooms, I'm going to make another prediction. The students will still not all be equal. And they will find that some children are still being left behind. I really admire the President's initiative in wanting to leave no child behind. And every effort should certainly be made not to leave any child behind. However, we are overlooking sometimes, once we have done everything we can do, once we have done everything we reasonably can be expected to do, we are still going to have unequal outcomes. And that's the challenge as to what it is we're going to do about that. Every time a sperm meets an egg, the dice are rolled and the results are unpredictable. Smart parents often have smart kids, but every time they roll the dice, the results will be different. They just will be different. There is the rare, almost exception of identical twins, but even there, they are different, as the parents of identical twins can tell you. We are simply not all the same. Jesus then, on another occasion, said this, and this one is a slightly different version of the same parable. It's as though Jesus didn't think we would get it with the one. So I'm going to give you two. I want to be sure that we have nailed this idea down. This one's in Luke 19, and this is the parable of the pounds. It has a distinct difference. He said, therefore, a certain nobleman went into a far country to receive a kingdom and to return. He called his 10 servants and delivered to them 10 pounds and said, occupy till I come. Now we're taking a different approach. We're going to call 10 people in here. And irrespective of whatever minor differences there might be between these people, we're going to give every single one of them precisely the same responsibility to work with, 1 pound. Everyone gets an equal opportunity. Mind you, this is one of the things people are concerned about. We're going to give everyone an equal opportunity. So we should get equal results, right? Well, no, we didn't quite make it. In verse 15, it came to pass when he was returned, having received the kingdom, he commanded those servants to be called to him to whom he had given the money, so he could know how much every man had gained by trading. Then came the first, saying, Lord, your pound has gained 10 pounds. He said to him, well, good and faithful servant, you have authority over 10 cities. Now we're getting a similar type of result from this that we got from the other one. We're getting different results from different people, And in these same cases, we're getting a response to the person saying, well, this is great, and what you have done is commensurate to what you're going to be given to do in the future. We have concluded that you're capable of handling more, so we're going to give you more. The second came and said, Lord, your pound has gained 5 pounds. He said likewise to him, be over 5 cities. So from a biblical point of view, the gifts are not necessarily the same. That we actually have different abilities to start with. And even given the same abilities and given the same opportunities, we are going to produce different results. Why will we produce different results? Different effort, different application, not trying hard enough, trying harder. However, what is interesting about this one is, he is saying you don't have to be as good as anybody else or everybody else in order to have done well. You don't have to produce what the guy who produced 10 pounds. You don't have to be another Warren Buffett, as far as investments are concerned, to be acceptable to me. I'm pleased with what you've done. And I'm going to give you more responsibility as a result of what you have done. Then another came and said, Lord, here's your pound. I've kept it laid up in a napkin because I was afraid of you. I know you're an austere man. I know you take up what you lay down. I know you reap what you don't sow. He said, out of your own mouth, I'm going to condemn you and judge you, you wicked servant. You knew I was an austere man, taking up what I laid not down, reaping what I did not sow. Why didn't you, and here it is again, why didn't you put the money in the bank so that at my coming I would have gotten the time value of money? Then I would not have lost anything. As it is, I have lost something. People don't understand this. They don't understand it. Well, I give you back the same thing you gave me. You haven't lost anything. Oh, yes, you have. He's lost opportunity, and he's lost the time value of money. These are things that people oftentimes, who don't know anything about money, mistakes that they oftentimes make. But the Lord, in this case, requires it of them. They said to him, Lord, and he said to them to stand by, take the pound from him and give it to him that has 10 pounds. The people standing there who are going to do this said, Lord, he's already got 10 pounds. Is this fair? And he said, I'm sorry. To everyone which has shall be given, from him that has not, even he shall be taken, what he has shall be taken away from him. Now that's frightening in a way, and it seems unfair in a way. However, the important thing to understand and remember in this is who the pound belonged to. The pound belonged to the Lord. It was his investment. And he took it away from a man who had been unfaithful with it and gave it to someone he could trust with it. It's really a very simple concept when you understand who the pound belonged to in the first place. And it's also easy to understand when you read through this that all men are not created equal. We have different abilities. We come out of the womb different. We perform differently throughout our lives. We get different results throughout our lives. And frankly, that's the way things, according to God, are supposed to work. We just don't get equality of results in real life. And when you start going out to try to correct that governmentally, that's where you head down the road to tyranny. The message here is, no matter how little you think you have been given, you are expected to make the most of it. Simple lesson, simple message, and a little chilling, as I said. Life is very much like a lottery. Talent, intelligence, ability, even genius are sprinkled around with God's salt shaker, with total abandon. It happens with random. It falls upon people regardless of what kind they are, whether they are high birth, low birth, where they are, or whatever they're doing. It is like the angel moving the waters, a totally random event. The movie Amadeus, in my opinion, was a real classic movie in this regard, because this was the message that lay at the heart of the movie. If you've never seen it, you might not fully understand what I'm driving at in this. But in the movie, you have Mozart, who confessed that he was a common and vulgar man, but he said, my music is not. And indeed, it was not. The man composed incredible music. And there was another man there who, in every way that one could look at, a man who made promises to God, vows to God. He was a praying man. He was a hard-working man. He was a man who wanted to be a great musician, far more than Amadeus Mozart wanted to be a great musician. But who was the genius? And who was the run-of-the-mill court musician? It was an interesting story. And it is true that the lottery of life bestowed one of the most incredible geniuses of music that ever has existed on the planet on a very common, a very vulgar, a very coarse man. And all around him swirled people who were, by all accounts, better people. People who worked harder, musicians who were more personally deserving of success. But never mind the hard work. Mozart was the genius. And I watched that movie, and I realize it isn't entirely accurate to Mozart's life, but I still looked at it and understood as I watched that what the writer of the script was saying to us all is that this happens in life, that there is a lottery in life, and that these things are bestowed just by accident here and there, no matter where you look in the world. Now, here's my question. Why do you suppose God made the world this way? Why the randomness to the way things happen in the world that we live here? Well, according to Jesus' parables, it is all a test. And it tests two major things. One, it tests what we are going to do with what we have been given with a view to giving us greater responsibilities later. I mean, the implications of both these parables for the life to come is stunning. It's there. It leaps off the page at you, and yet it seems like most people can read through the Bible and never get it. Never realize the implications of what Jesus is saying. That the lottery of life, the things that you are given now, are a test to see what you will do with them for the view to giving you greater responsibility later. And I don't just mean in this life, because the test goes all the way to the end of this life, and in some cases has to do with the way we handle the end. Second thing it tests in a major way how we are going to treat one another. Whether or not we're going to say to someone who is suffering, yeah, well, you've got it coming. Oh, well, he made his bed, let him lie in it. All the things that we will toss out regarding the reasons why we won't lift a finger to help our brother. It tests all those things in us. And because of the fact that we don't recognize, and you know, we used to have a phrase, you heard it more in the old days. It seems like nowadays it's beginning to fade away, and I think it's fading away because of a change in our culture. We would speak of people who are less fortunate than we are. I think what is beginning to happen in our society is maybe it's changing to people who are less deserving than we are. And that would be a terrible thing for us to do. Because while true, we all work, some of us work harder and get results from our life and the things that we do, we get rewards of it, still, we are the benefactors of the lottery of life, and our life could have been entirely different if we'd taken a left turn instead of a right turn in one street or another. It would have been entirely different if we'd chosen one college over another. It would have been entirely different if we'd married a different person. It would have been entirely different if we had done all kinds of things. We have had accident after accident after accident that has directed the course of our lives. And the old saying, there, but for the grace of God go I, was a reflection at one time of someone who had read a lot of the Bible and understood the principles that are being brought out in these parables. Now, the parable that I read to you first, a parable of the talents, in which I said initially, okay, here's Jesus telling us that what we do makes a difference, but it doesn't make all the difference. He is talking about how that men are not created equal, that we're going to give people gifts according to their several abilities. And then he said, because you have been faithful in a few things, I'm going to make you ruler over many things. We saw that in that parable. Now, I don't know if you've ever made the connection, because as I said before, this is a test of two things. It's a test of what we do with what we've been given. Secondly, it's a test of how we treat one another. The very next parable in Matthew 25 is all about how we treat one another. It's a familiar one, Matthew 25 and verse 31. Right after the parable of the talents. Right after the saying, you've been faithful over a few things, I'll make you ruler over many things. When the Son of Man shall come in his glory and all the holy angels with him, he will sit on the throne of his glory, and before him shall be gathered all nations. And he will separate them one from another as a shepherd divides the sheep from the goats. And he shall set the sheep on his right hand and the goats on his left. And then shall the king say to them on his right hand, come, ye blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you let me spend the night at your house. I didn't have a coat, and it was cold, and you gave me some clothes. I was sick, and you came to my house and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me. And the righteous stand there blinking and looking at one another and wondering what he's talking about. And they said, well, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you drink? When did we see you a stranger and take you in, or naked and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and come to you? And the king shall answer and say to them, verily I say unto you, inasmuch as you have done it to one of the least of these my brethren, the least of these my brethren, you have done it to me. It's hard to get your mind around this in a way. But when you come back to it and you realize that Jesus was arrested, he was humiliated, his clothes were stripped off, he was made to suffer pain, he did endure a crown of thorns, he was beaten within an inch of his life, he was hung up on a stake, and he didn't deserve any of it. Not a bit. Life didn't just happen to him because it was planned. But the point is simply, it's still there for us to see and to believe that just because someone suffers, it is not necessarily his fault. In the case of Jesus' suffering, it was our fault. But nevertheless, the question of what are you going to do with what you've got, you've been given, and then how are you going to treat one another is fundamental to this whole question of the fact that all men are not created equal. We are different. We're different in very important ways. Now, I could read the rest of the parable to you. It's a little bit frightening because it talks to the people who had not done these things. And they depart into a lake of fire prepared for the devil and his angels, where there should be weeping and gnashing of teeth. And that's pretty sobering. They go away into everlasting punishment, the righteous to life eternal. And what's fascinating about this is, and it's a little hard in some areas of Christian theology to cope with, it has to do with the way people live their lives, whether they go to life eternal or go to everlasting punishment. I mean, I didn't say it. Jesus said it. Now, it is true enough that a person can be sick, in prison, naked, hungry, and cold through his own negligence and his own laziness. Everybody knows that. But he can also have just been dealt a bad hand. The cards were shuffled, the deck was cut, and the cards were dealt out, and through no fault of his own, he was dealt a bad hand. He may not have played the hand very well either, as far as that's concerned, but it's kind of hard sometimes to do that. The challenge to those who have the power to do something about it is to realize that we have no business judging. We have only business helping. There's a political philosophy today that is characterized by what Robert Bork called radical egalitarianism and radical individualism. Egalitarianism is a position or an idea resulting from or characterized by belief in the equality of all people, especially in political, economic, or social life. In practice, it refers to the equality of outcomes rather than the equality of opportunity. And again, go back to the parable of the pounds. Everyone gets a pound. One man produces 10, another 5, another produces nothing. To the egalitarian, this outcome is unacceptable. To him, it is prima facie evidence of discrimination and of a lack of opportunity. Yet in the Bible, it is evidences of differences in human ability and human performance, and you can't escape it in the Bible. And yet, as I said, abroad strongly in our land today is a contrary philosophy to that. That people have philosophies contrary to the Bible should not be a surprise. What might come as a surprise to you is the ease with which Christian people can be sort of suckered into accepting some of the ideas afloat today, even though they have read the Bible. In the Bible, a man is accountable not for his ability. He's accountable for his performance. Consider this. The doctrine of grace, as taught by some people, is an egalitarian idea. It's the same for everybody. Regardless of our efforts, regardless of what we do, the outcome is the same. And yet you read through the teachings of Jesus and you will find inescapably that Jesus did not teach that regardless of what you do, the outcome is the same. That's not what grace is all about. Jesus himself makes it plain that what we do makes a difference. It may be hard for some people to deal with this, but a lot of Christian doctrine has its roots in the philosophy of enlightenment and not in the teachings of Jesus. Consider this. If we were all equal, we could have uniformity, but unity would be impossible if we were all equal, all alike. Unity depends on the pulling together of unequal parts to make a whole, a community, a church, if you will. And here is where radical egalitarianism and radical individualism come together. If we are all the same, if we are uniform, then we have no need for unity. We can function as individuals. We can be the rugged individualists doing our own thing regardless of anything that happens to anybody else, because after all, we're all equal. I'm not my brother's keeper, which was probably the first expression of this idea. Each individual is the same and has no need of another. Therefore, the relationships we create, and this is kind of a shocking thing when I read this, the relationships we create are market relationships. We relate only so long as we agree to relate, only so long as it fits our temporary circumstances, our purposes, our needs, or our wants more likely. Then we create market relationships. It's good for you, it's good for me, and as long as it's good for you and good for me, we'll move in together and we'll live together. If it comes to the place where it's not good for you or it's not good for me, we'll break it up and we'll each go our separate ways as rugged individualists. Marriage then is temporary. Church is temporary. All allegiances can be abandoned as our wants change. As our needs change, as whatever we feel changes, it can go. But the truth is that a church and a marriage or a family are a union of unequal parts. Radical, doesn't everybody understand that? That a husband and a wife are not interchangeable. Mom and dad are not interchangeable parts. We can't discard mom and get another mom in here. That this is not what marriage is all about. That man and woman are not equal. That father and son are not equal. That we are just not equal. That a church and a family are a union of unequal parts. Radical egalitarianism, radical individualism are the enemies of both family and church. And they are probably the dominant political philosophy in the world you and I live in. Individualism involves the pursuit of individual rather than common or collective interests. Radical individualism involves a drastic reduction in the limits of personal gratification. It means whatever feels good, do it. And that's the way you live your life. Thus, an abortion is a reasonable action if not having an abortion means you're going to miss the family skiing vacation. After all, you're an individual. We're all created equal. You do what is good for you, what feels good for you, that fits your wants and your needs. This is the result of the radical approach to these things. It should not take much, really, to realize that these ideas are totally contrary to the teachings of Christ and indeed to the entirety of the Bible from front to back. But the prevailing wisdom of the world makes it hard to see through what is happening and how it affects every part of our lives. And it makes regular Bible reading and Bible study even more imperative. Philosophies come and philosophies go, but the Word of God stands forever. The importance of what I'm telling you today is this. It is out of our inequalities that the possibility of unity arises. Think about it. It's out of our inequalities that the very possibility of unity arises. Now, with that in mind, I'm going to finally take you back to 1 Corinthians chapter 12. A scripture that has sometimes been much misunderstood and much abused, and I think that perhaps we can understand it more clearly on the basis of what I've just told you. 1 Corinthians chapter 12. Concerning spiritual gifts, brethren, I don't want you to be ignorant. You know that when you were Gentiles, you were carried away by the dumb idols even as you were led. Wherefore I give you to understand that no man speaking by the Spirit of God calls Jesus anathema. No man can say Jesus is Lord but by the Holy Spirit. Now, there are diversities of gifts, but the same Spirit. There are diversities of administrations, but the same Lord. There are diversities of operations, but it's the same God that works all in all. But the manifestation of the Spirit is given to each man to profit withal. To one is given by the Spirit the word of wisdom. To another the word of knowledge by the same Spirit. To another faith by the same Spirit. To another the gifts of healing by the same Spirit. To another the working of miracles. To another prophecy. To another the discerning of spirits. To another divers kinds of tongues. To another the interpretation of tongues. And so on it goes. Do you understand what he's saying here? He's saying that God comes along with his salt shaker and at random scatters stuff all over the church. And it is necessary in order to have a unity, to have a church become one, that you must have all kinds of different people who are together to work together. That's what this message is all about. It is about the inequality of man. It's about the need of man for one another. It's about the way that we fill in the blanks for one another, the way we fit into the empty spaces in one another, and the way we pull together to form one church, one family, one flesh, in the case of husband and wife. And it is only, I really think, in understanding this idea that we can begin to get to realize that the extent to which the world has invaded our thought processes, even to the extent that we start thinking in terms as members of a church that we are individuals, that we don't need the church doesn't need us, that we can isolate ourselves from others. There are people who will isolate themselves from their family. They cut themselves off from family, from associations. Their friends are temporary because their friends meet their needs now, and if they don't meet their needs, they're not going to be their friends anymore, and so on it goes. We need our families. We need our churches. We need one another because we aren't equal. We're all different. We were all created with by our Creator, endowed with our Creator with great needs in addition to rights. And those needs are found by the creation of community. And the ideal situation from God's point of view is that each of us should be a member of a family which is a community, which exists within a larger community, which is the church, which exists in a larger community yet, which is the whole realm of the churches of God, wherever they may be. As each of us lock arms, each of us lock into the puzzle, each of us become a part of whatever it is that's going on, that we can make the contribution that God intended for us to make. That we can be the one in the parable to whom God says, "Well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful in little. I'm going to make you ruler over a lot."